Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Back when I was attending a university, I used to work on campus at one of the dining halls during the dinner or night shift. I lived in the next town over since it was really cheaper to live in a crappy little apartment out of town than to live on campus in the dorms. But I didn't own a car, so I had to take the bus. One night, I had just gotten off a shift at my work. My feet were killing me, and I was completely exhausted. And as I slowly made my way to the bus stop, I noticed a man much older than me sitting on one of the two benches at the otherwise empty bus stop. But I didn't pay too much attention to him. I simply sat down on the second bench, and I listened to some music while waiting for the bus to arrive. The first sign that things were starting to get weird was when I kept noticing out of the corner of my eye that he was staring at me. At first, I thought I might be imagining it, so I looked over and caught him quickly turning his head to look away. Okay, so he was staring at me. This wasn't completely out of the ordinary, since being a young college girl seemed to gain me a bit of attention from older men. So like usual, I just ignored him. That was a mistake. Again, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him look at me. But instead of just staring this time, he got up and walked over to sit next to me instead. I continued listening to my music, hoping that he would see the earbuds and take the hint that I wasn't interested in having a conversation. Instead, this man literally took the earbud out of my ear. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said, as my head snapped to look at him in shock. I should have told him off for touching my things and demanded that he leave me alone, but I was sort of frozen and I didn't want to make him mad. Hi," I replied quietly. He started introducing himself as Mike and telling me that he lived in the area and that it was always nice to see pretty girls like me at the university bus stop. He explained that he was a real man, unlike the boys that I went to school with, and that I should go home with him that night. I was a shy, scared virgin who had never had a man be as bold as this to my face, and I say to my face because I had certainly gotten my fair share of unsolicited private pictures online, but I digress. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. But that didn't stop Mike from continuing to explain to me all of the fun things that he wanted to do with me at his place that night. He really got into graphic detail about it. The things he described started out with basic things you'd expect and escalated to him asking if I liked being choked until I turned purple and passed out in bed. I wish there was anyone else at that bus stop, but it was just the two of us, in the dark alone, as I counted the seconds until the bus would arrive. Then Mike took things to a different level of shock by telling me, "Listen, the demons want me to ask for your phone number, and they say you should give it to me, or you won't like what happens." He actually had the audacity to start stroking my hair. His hand was gentle, but I didn't want him touching me at all. This was shocking for a number of reasons. The demons? I wouldn't like what would happen. Why was he touching me? What the hell is this guy talking about? As though he could read my mind, Mike went on to explain. "My therapist knows the demons are real. I told her about them, and she says that I'm not crazy and demons are real." He laughed and then abruptly stopped. "Now, give me your phone number like they said," he demanded. And as his hand stroked my hair for the last time, he stopped and gripped the back of my neck, still gentle, but even more terrifying. I was scared and obviously didn't want him to have my phone number, but he was taking out his phone and I knew that he was going to call the number that I gave him to make sure that I wasn't lying to him. And also, he still had his hand on the back of my neck, so I reluctantly gave him my real phone number. Stupid, I know, but I was right, and he immediately called to check. All I could think about was not making this guy angry long enough to get away from him, and then I would block his number. And thankfully, the bus came moments later. I sat down as close to the front of the bus, near the bus driver as I possibly could, since the bus was basically empty. Mike decided to sit directly across from me. At this point, I had tried listening to music again, hoping that being on the bus and him having my phone number would signal to him the end of our conversation. However, he decided to reach over and unzip my sweatshirt, revealing my work shirt and also the name tag, which I had unfortunately forgotten to remove in my haste to leave work that night. I hadn't told him my name yet. Abigail, what a beautiful name. Our daughter will be named Celeste. I shouldn't have been in shock at this point, but I was. I'd stopped listening to music again and I zipped my sweatshirt back up, which made him laugh. He said, "You won't be needing that soon anyway." And then he winked at me, implying how he'd planned to undress me even further that night. At one stop, Mike tried to convince me to get off the bus with him, and I told him no, that I was tired and I just wanted to go home. So he said okay and stayed on the bus. I knew that that had been his stop, so the fact that he was staying on the bus worried me. I was sure this meant that he was planning on coming home with me instead. "Baby," Mike whispered to me, and I tried to ignore him, but he repeated himself louder. "Baby." He had the most unsettling smile on his face, and I asked, "What?" He laughed and told me, "The demons say you smell nice." I was terrified, and I felt like I was going to throw up by the time that the bus stop arrived. I lived in an apartment alone, and I didn't want him to know where I lived. Despite my body being exhausted and sore from work, adrenaline kicked in, and I bolted off the bus and ran straight home. I made it inside and I locked the door, and I looked through the peephole and I didn't see him. So I went to carefully peek out of my window and saw him standing near the bus stop, looking around. He took out his phone, and sure enough, I started getting a call from an unknown number since I hadn't saved his number, and I ignored it. When he hung up, I started getting several texts asking where I'd gone, how he didn't like hide and seek, and how the demons just wanted to have fun, but I was being a little bitch about it. I was so scared because he knew which apartment building I lived in, where I worked, where I went to school, my phone number and my name. And the only good thing which made me feel slightly relieved was that he didn't know which specific apartment number I lived in. But that's when he started yelling outside. There were no specific words said, just wordless yells of what I can only assume were frustration and anger. I blocked his number and kept all the lights in my apartment off as I cried with my back to the front door. Maybe I should have called the police, but my brain was so frazzled that I didn't even think of that until the next day. And by then, All I knew about him was that he was a mentally unstable man, probably named Mike, who hadn't actually done any physical harm to me, so I didn't think it was worth it. In hindsight, I know that I made a lot of stupid mistakes during this experience, and I ended up moving away entirely at the end of that term of school for unrelated reasons. But until then, I switched to day shifts at work, and I was paranoid every night. Thankfully, I never saw that man again though. So Mike, the scary guy from the bus stop who tried to follow me home, I never want to meet you or your demons ever again. The story takes place around 2009, and I just moved to South Carolina from the PNW region. A little bit of a backstory. I just turned 21, and I was working a full-time job in the medical field, and I had absolutely no friends since I was new to the area. One night, I really got bored, so I decided that I was going to put myself out there. I drove from my tiny town, then to Columbia, SC. It's about a 40-minute drive away, but I knew that's where all the good clubs or bars were. I was specifically looking for a gay-friendly spot. I found myself downtown looking for a club that was no longer there, though earlier when I searched, the internet said that it was. Well, disappointed, I talked with this lady outside a club across the street, and she told me about a chill, laid-back bar with a karaoke in West Columbia. Sounds great, I thought. She gave me directions, and then I headed that way. I passed by a gas station on my way to buy a soda, and I asked a lady if she knew whether or not I was in the right area. Well, it appears that I was, so I drove about 5 or 6 blocks until I made it there. Now, I'm not the life of the party, and I'm somewhat introverted, and was quite nervous my whole time there. I talked with a couple for a bit that was from the area, and I ordered a margarita and smoked my cigarettes watching a Katy Perry drag show. Well, this man walks in. About 5'9", roughly 200 pounds, dark skin, goatee, wearing a white hoodie, jeans and also a red hat. He sits next to me and winks. He orders his drinks and then asks me for a cigarette. Sure, I said. I asked him how he was doing and if he was from around the area. His answers were short and I'm feeling kind of awkward at this point, so I just take it as he's not too interested, and then I turn my stool and I continue watching the drag show. This is when the vibe completely changes. I feel his warm breath in my ear whispering, "Meet me out back my car." And with that, he gets up and then leaves. Now, I'm not very sexually experienced at that point in my life, and certainly not going to blow some stranger in his car inside a parking lot. He didn't even have much to say in the first place, so I stayed for about 20 more minutes. It seemed like there wasn't much of anyone else there my age, and I didn't seem to be making headway as everyone there seemed to be with someone, and I was just alone. I figured that that was about as much as a night out as I was going to have. As I'm leaving the bar and entering my car, I see headlights flash from behind me. A figure arose from the car, and it's that guy. He throws his arms up and he starts running towards me. And I'm not messing around. I put my 1992 Corolla in drive and I sped it on out of there. I remember all the lights were green, which I thought was great, seeing as I was able to get away from that area fast. But oh no, he was right behind me. He continues to follow me. I come up upon that gas station that I was at earlier in the night, and I see a cop car parked outside of it. So I pulled in and I parked. Of course, the dude at the bar did too. He parked right beside me, and I got out and I went inside to tell the police officer that he followed me from the bar and I was feeling uneasy from it. He went outside and found the guy start to pull out of the parking lot. He waved him down, and as the police backup car pulls up in the gas station, they walk over to get a statement. Turns out, the guy had an expired license and a warrant out for his arrest, and when they frisked him, he had a hunting knife on him. I remember the disturbing look he gave me as they cuffed him. I couldn't believe it. I just left, and I was completely lost again. This time, I'm distraught, so it took me forever to get home. Had I got in the car with him, who knows what could have happened. So, guy at the bar, let's not meet again. This happened about 4 years ago, and I was 20 at that time. The first time I met the guy who would become my grocery store stalker. He was standing outside the store, collecting money for the Salvation Army Christmas time donations. I'm a fairly friendly person, so I like to say hi to people who work at places that I frequent to just to be nice. This guy was a kid around my age, very tall, with a mild resemblance to Lurch from the Addams Family. Dark circles, under dark eyes, short black hair, kind of a vacant look in his eyes. I chatted with him for maybe 2 minutes, just idle chit-chat about the weather and whatnot, nothing particularly memorable or interesting. I then waved goodbye and then went home. But little did I know that that single moment would be the start of something that would have me genuinely afraid. About 4 or 5 months passed, and I hadn't seen him again. Then one day, as I was grocery shopping with a friend, as we were chatting, she suddenly got really quiet and kind of recoiled backwards, looking behind me. I turned around to see this guy, who had to be at least 6'4", towering over me, not even 8 inches from my body. He said hi, and told me that he remembered me from that December that I had talked to him. He then proceeded to ask for my number. I, being young and never having experienced this type of interaction before, I told him that I didn't have my number memorized, but that I would write his down and that I would text him later. I kind of half waved my phone at him, pointing out my at the time boyfriend, whose picture was my wallpaper. I made it a point to say, "Oh, look, this is my boyfriend," to the guy, hoping that he would clue in. But no luck. He told me his number, which immediately upon getting, I blocked, without letting him get my phone number. However, what really made my blood run cold was what he said after I put my phone away. He leaned in really close and in a low voice, he told me, "Whatever I text you is for your eyes only." At this point, I started to feel genuinely uncomfortable, and I said, Yeah, sure. Nice talking to you, but we gotta get back to shopping." And I grabbed my friend and dragged her off, shooting a panicked look at her and asking why she didn't bail me out. Apparently, he scared her too with his getting so close to me, and she didn't know what to do. I want to make it clear, I'm not exactly a small girl. I'm 5'8" and solidly built, and I can certainly handle myself, and I very rarely feel intimidated or small in the presence of anyone, either male or female. But this guy made me feel tiny and scared. And in the months that would follow, he would make me feel truly frightened. I had hoped that creepy interaction would be the last time that I saw him, but that was unfortunately not the case. After that initial meeting with him saying that creepy thing about his text being for my eyes only, it seemed like I would run into him every single time that I got to the store. No matter what checkout lane I was, he always seemed to appear at the end of it when I was finished shopping. And every time that I was in a store, I would notice him out of the corner of my eye watching me, no matter what area I was in. One time, I even caught him following me out to my car. And at that point, I got scared and I decided to say something to the managers. After letting the managers know what was going on, they assured me that they would tell him not to talk to me anymore. After that, he wouldn't speak to me, but I would continue to see him following me around the store at a distance every time that I went up there. It got so bad and I felt so frightened that I started to be afraid to go to the store at all. But I am one of those stubborn people who refuses to be intimidated by someone to a point where I will stop doing something. I had just hoped that maybe it was a coincidence that he was following me. After all, it was a big store, and maybe he just had things to do that just happened to be in the area that I was shopping in. So I started to pay close attention to my surroundings. Once I started really paying attention, I realized that every single time I was up there, I would constantly notice him in the areas of the store that I was in. During my last encounter with him, I went up to the store to grab just 2 or 3 items that I needed for dinner that night. I first saw him standing outside the store when I got there, and with his back to me, I quickly ran inside, hoping that he didn't see me. Unfortunately, a few minutes later, I saw him at the very back of the store, and items in hand, I immediately made a beeline towards the front. As soon as I got near the checkout, I ducked behind one of the shelf displays, and I watched carefully at the front of the store to see if this creeper would appear, and he did. I watched as he looked up and down in the checkout, and when he didn't see me there, I saw him step out. At this point, I quickly ran into the nearest open cashier. I rang up my items, and I stuck my head out of the door to look for him. I didn't see him there immediately, so I started trying to make my way back to where I was parked. I was parked a ways away, near the side of the store, where a bunch of other small stores and restaurants were lined up. And as I was walking towards my car, I realized that I saw him standing by the entrance that I had first entered the store through. I ducked behind a pillar immediately, hoping he didn't see me. I watched carefully from behind the pillar, and as he scanned the parking lot, he obviously couldn't find me. After a minute or two, he started to walk out towards the direction of the parking lot in front of the store. And so I took that opportunity to make a run for it to my car as soon as he was far away and that I felt safe. As soon as I got into my car, I locked the doors, and to my horror, when I looked up, he was standing there about 15 feet from my car with a shopping cart in front of him. I knew he followed me, and he knew that I knew. I fully believed that he had chased me after, and when I made it to my car, he grabbed the nearest cart to make it look like he was collecting them. I remember just feeling absolutely terrified at that moment. I went home, and I immediately told my grandfather what had happened. I began crying and shaking, and my grandfather told me to get into the car and that we were going to settle this. He and I drove up to the store in his car, and he walked me into the store and demanded that we spoke with the managers immediately, both of them. When the managers arrived at the customer service area, he then asked me to tell them what had been happening, and he demanded that they ensure that he left me alone or that he would involve the police. The managers swore up and down that they would take care of it. And as far as I know, he wasn't fired immediately, because my friend who first encountered him with me when this whole thing began, she told me that she would see him from time to time when she was there by herself, but that any time that I went with her, she would never see him. I fully believe he knew whenever I was there, only this time, instead of stalking me, he avoided me. Eventually, everyone who knew the situation stopped seeing him there, so I think he may have gotten fired or moved on from that store. Either way, I haven't had any issues since, but I have never in my life felt so afraid of another human being as I did that day seeing him make eye contact with me in that parking lot as I locked my doors. It still creeps me out to think that he was watching me so closely every single time that I would enter the store, and that he could easily avoid or follow me whenever he wanted. So, to the guy who stalked me every time that I went grocery shopping for 4 months straight, let's never meet again. To set the stage for the story, we must go back to the far-off year of 1988. The location is the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. I was 10 years old, and with me was my mom, dad, best friend, and our golden retriever, Amber. We were very much an outdoor family and had many camping trips before this and since. But to this day, when I think about it, I still remember the terror that I felt that weekend so long ago. After a brief talk with my father recently, it kind of came back to the front of my mind. He also was able to fill in a few details that I had forgotten. This holiday was like many others. We packed up the station wagon with everything we would need for a hike into one of our favorite lakes to camp at. To make this trip even more exciting for me, the fact that it was my birthday weekend and I got to pick this lake. After we arrived at the trailhead and got our packs on, my dad got his sidearm out and then strapped it on his belt. In Oregon, open carry was permitted in national forest, and my dad always had a gun on his hip while in the woods, which always added a sense of security to us, because we had a close call with a bear one time, in which it came in handy. The lake was about a 4-mile moderate hike in through some thick forest, but the trail itself was well maintained and was never busy, so it was going to be a very pleasant hike in. We started off on our hike, and back in the 80s, it was not uncommon to have your dog off leash on the trails in the forest. So we let Amber run and do her thing. She was a good dog and never ran off for too long or even jumped on people. She did love people though, and speaking of people, we had not seen anyone else on the trail after about 2 miles in on the hike, which was really nice since it was just all of us talking, laughing, and enjoying nature. My best friend and I start to hike ahead of everyone else because we were so energized and excited about finding the first and best tent spot once we got to the lake. Amber was bounding ahead of us and having a great time too. We were about 20 yards ahead of my parents when Amber stopped dead in her tracks. I thought she maybe saw a chipmunk or something, maybe a bird, but her hackles came up and she let out the lowest of growls. She never growls, so we stopped walking, and I thought that maybe it was a bear or maybe a deer or something was just off the trail and she saw or heard it. We immediately started walking backwards and my parents got up to us. My dad asked us what was going on, and I told him that Amber is up the trail and is growling at something. He tells us girls to stay back with my mom, and he walks ahead to where Amber was at on the trail. My dad gets up to her and looks around, and I hear Amber whimper a bit while looking off the trail. My dad comforts her and calls her back, and she walks back to us. He says that it must have been an animal, but he did not see anything right off the trail or ahead of us. He says to let him take the lead, and then we continue to hike. It didn't take long before it was forgotten, and Amber and the rest of us were all having a good time again. We arrived at the lake, and much to my delight, there was no one else there camping. The water was clean and blue, and the shade from the trees made the whole scene just perfect. My friend and I found the best spot to set up our tents, and my parents followed suit. After we had camp set up, my folks went off to fish just down the hill, and my friend and I took off with Amber to walk around the other side of the lake to catch salamanders. We only made it about 1/8 of a mile when Amber stopped and started to growl again. We stopped and looked around and heard brush rustling. Then right in front of us, a man walked out of the trees. Amber stayed right by our sides and started to bare her teeth. He was taller than my dad, so at least 6'4". He was very skinny but had very broad shoulders. He was clean-cut and was wearing black jeans and a white polo shirt with loafers. I mean, he did not look like he had hiked at all or was even dressed for the outdoors. He almost looked like he came out of church. We just stood there, trying to process the situation, when Amber began to bark. The guy just stood there, not moving, and he smiled, like the creepiest smile. It felt like someone who thought that that was what a smile was supposed to look like. Amber kept barking, and this got my parents' attention, and they looked up to us and called out to us to come back. We complied and started to walk back towards them. My dad met us halfway and told us to go back to the campsite and that he was going to talk to this guy. We got back to our camp and my mom sat with us. I could hear my dad asking the guy if he needed help or was a fellow camper who had just set up a camp away from the lake. My dad was being polite and calm, but I could see that he was on his guard and trying to feel out the situation. Now is the time to mention that my dad was an ex-army and can be very intimidating when needed. The conversation continues. The guy told my dad that he was just on a walk and did not mean to intrude on us, and the guy says goodbye and walks back into the woods. My dad walked back to camp, sat down, and then told us that he thinks the guy may just be a yuppie camper and does not know much about the outdoors. But my dad said that he got a weird vibe off of him and would be keeping out an eye for him. And Amber stayed by our side and was calm, yet she kept looking towards the direction that the guy went. A bit more time goes by, and we have a nice campfire going, and the sun was starting to set. We cooked some dinner and made s'mores afterwards, and my friend and I decided to go to our tent and read some books and tell each other some scary stories. Amber followed us to the tent and laid right outside of the door. My parents walked down to the lake to sit, have a beer and just chill, and they were never more than 50 yards away. But not long after my parents walked away, I hear Amber start to growl. Then we hear footsteps coming from the woods behind our tent. My friend and I turn off our flashlight, and I go quiet to listen. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the woods, and we then hear heavy breathing and a grunting sound. Amber starts to bark, and we then hear the footsteps retreat to the woods. Amber whimpers a bit, and I then hear my parents walking back to the camp. I go out and tell them what happened, and my dad said that he heard Amber barking, and that is why they came back up. I asked my dad what we should do, what is going on, and if that strange guy was the one creeping around. He tells me that he will see about moving camp in the morning, and since we still have 3 days left on the trip, and nothing has happened to warrant just leaving. But he said that we will play it by ear and just be a little more vigilant, and if something changes, we will decide what to do next. He then tells us to try to get some sleep, and we all turn in for the night. The next morning, we get up and have breakfast, and after breakfast, we head down to the lake to fish. It was a beautiful day, and we were having so much fun that the events from the prior day were almost forgotten. We decided around lunchtime that we would go for a short hike to the waterfall that is up from the lake. We were gone for only about an hour, and when we came back, we found our tents opened and our sleeping bags dragged out on the ground. My dad tells us to hang back with Mom, and then he goes to investigate. He comes back and says nothing is missing, but it was not an animal that did this. He says that we should break camp, hike back to the car, and find another spot to camp for the next couple of days. I could tell my dad was not wanting to frighten us, but I heard the urgency in his voice. I was very disappointed, but if it meant that we could enjoy the rest of the trip and not worry about some creep messing with us, then it was worth it. We broke camp and started our hike back. Dad was in the lead, and we were double timing it, and then we made it back to the car in record time. As we walk over to the car, we see that one of our tires was flat. Not a big deal, we always had a spare, but when my dad bent down to start taking the lugs off, we swore it was not just flat. Someone slashed the tire. Dad changed the tire in record time, and we threw everything into the car, and he goes to turn the car on, but it wouldn't start. Dad swears, gets out of the car and pops the hood. He says, "Shit." It turns out, someone took our spark plug wires. Old cars like the Chevy wagon did not have internal hood releases, so you could just pop the hood from the outside. Dad slams the hood, says some very colorful words, and then kicks some rocks. We were stuck, and no one else was at the trailhead. We were stranded. My parents are calm under pressure, and after a few minutes of discussion, it was decided that Dad would start walking down the road until he could hitch a ride to town and then go to the auto parts store. Mom and the rest of us were going to have to wait in the car and look for someone to hopefully pull into the trail and then help us. A few hours go by and no one has come to the trailhead. It was getting hot and we are hungry and tired. My mom makes us lunch and we go to sit under a tree to cool off. Amber is by our side and was calm. But then we hear a voice. Amber leaps up and starts to whimper. The creepy guy from yesterday comes down the trail and is asking my mom if we need help. My mom tells him that we are fine, that it's being settled, and that my dad will come back soon. The creep then tells her that his camp is closed and he is parked on the old fire road that is near the lake and asks if we would like to come back to his camp and wait until my dad returns. Mom sternly tells him no, that we will just wait here and thank you anyway. He does not like this. He tells my mom that it's not safe out here for a pretty lady and 2 young girls. My mom, like my dad, is no pushover and asserts herself again that we do not need any help and to please just leave us alone. The guy just stands there, smiles wide, and then just turns around and leaves. My mom is visibly shaken, and us girls were just a bit scared, and my mom comes over to us and tells us that we need to stay close to not wander, and that we will be okay. My friend and I are really kind of freaked out, and that we were just hoping that my dad will make it back soon. After about another 30 minutes, the creepy guy comes back. This time though, he is not alone and has a slightly younger guy with him. The other guy is dressed as a yuppie camper and had a very stern look on his face. My mother stands her ground as they approach. Amber starts to low growl and her hackles go up. The two guys flank us and one of them flashes a gun tucked into his belt. The older guy tells us that we need to go with them and that they were not asking. My mom backs up next to us and without taking her eyes off them, reaches to her belt and pulls out her Bowie knife. My mom said that we will not be going and that they need to leave now. The two men did not even flinch at this and said that we will come with them or they will hurt us. At this moment though, Amber goes from just growling to barking and puts herself between us and them. This makes the guy stop. My mom yells that they need to leave now, and they start backing up, and at that moment, we hear a truck pulling into the trailhead parking lot. At the side of the truck, the guys start to walk away fast and then disappear into the tree line. The truck was a forest ranger, and he had my dad with him. My dad jumped out of the truck and ran over to us, asking if we were okay. The ranger came over and asked who those men were and if we were okay. My mom explained everything while my dad hugged us girls and told us that we will be okay. The ranger then takes off to go looking for the men. My dad tells us that he was about 5 miles from the town when the ranger picked him up and then took him the rest of the way to get the part of the car. He then drove him back to our car. And after hearing what happened, my dad was pissed and wanted to find the guys who tried to kidnap us and that had been terrorizing us for the past 24 hours. The ranger came back and told us that he had almost caught up to them, but they sped away in their truck with a camper in tow. They had been parked behind a small ridge behind the lake on an old logging road. He did not get a plate, but he did radio a description of the men and their truck and camper to the local sheriff's office. He also took our information and said that he would pass it on to them. He waited with us until my dad had the car fixed and we were able to leave. We just decided to not continue camping and instead drive a couple of hours to spend the last 2 days of the trip at a beach and stay in a hotel. A few days later, a deputy called my dad and told him that they never did find the men. He said that it was most likely a crime of opportunity after seeing a woman with 2 girls in tow. He was sure that they had been watching us from off the trail and had messed with our camp to judge how my dad would react. But my dad seemed to be too big of a threat. They sabotaged our car, hoping to put us in a position where we would be vulnerable. He said they would follow up with us if they find out anything else. But according to my dad, nothing ever came of it. Years later, I tried to do some research on crimes in the area of Oregon during the 80s that might have involved something like we experienced. But all I could find was a few reports of campers being robbed and a few cars broken into. There was one case of a young lady and her dog going missing from an area near there, but it was never determined what happened to her, or even if it was something bad, or if she just ran away. I can tell you that we did go back to that lake a few years later and had a very uneventful camping trip. It was nice to go back and find some joy in a spot that was so special to me. I really hope those creepy guys never hurt anyone, and maybe were caught for other crimes. But I will never know though. I just hope to never run into a situation like that again. I can say that having a dog along with us helped our situation. She was the hero and she kept us alert. Amber went on to live until she was 12 years old and passed with her favorite people around her. Remember to stay safe, stay watchful, and it never hurts to have a sweet, brave dog with you. This happened tonight, and I'm not sure how to process the whole situation. I was driving home from a friend's house, and I was taking a freeway, but I was driving carefully since it was raining pretty hard. Driving home was going to take at least 30 minutes, but it turned to almost an hour ride just because of the rain. I was about 10 minutes away when I noticed this gray Chrysler van acting off. We were at an intersection, about to turn left, but the light was red. I was behind him, and the thing is, at this intersection, there are 2 lanes that allow you to turn left. We were both on the second lane when all of a sudden, he awkwardly decided to slowly change lanes to the one beside me and almost ran the red light. I could tell that he hit his brakes pretty hard, and I thought that it was weird or that maybe that dude was drunk. When the light turned green, I proceeded with caution because he was giving me a weird feeling. I was about 6 minutes away from home at this point when all of a sudden, he turned on his emergency light on. I could see that he was pulling over to the shoulder, so I slowed down, and since we were driving on one lane, I proceeded with caution and then slowly passed him. Keep in mind, it was nighttime and raining a lot, so not a lot of cars were around us. And as soon as I passed him, I looked at my front view mirror and I saw that he turned off his emergency lights and then started to follow behind me. I really felt off about it. And while driving, I saw he was flashing his lights and thought that maybe my lights were off. But that's not possible because I could still see the light projecting from my car onto the road. At this point, I'm thinking that he is just messing with me. But that's when I noticed that he started to tailgate me. He almost hit me like 3 times, and then I started to panic. At this point, I knew that I had to get away from him. And for a second I thought that I was being dramatic, but every time that I would change lanes, he would change lanes too. I managed to speed off and take the exit off the freeway. I was less than a minute away now, but I didn't go home yet. I parked by a construction building near my house and then decided to wait a bit to see if he would follow me off the freeway. Thankfully he didn't, and I waited at least 5 minutes just to make sure. After that, I was able to go home safely. I told my boyfriend what had happened, and we double-checked that my car was okay. The lights were in fact working, and so did my taillights. There was nothing wrong with my car, and nothing for that dude to have any reason to flash his lights at me. I was really freaked from this whole situation. I'm not sure what I did to make him act the way he did, but I just hope that no one encounters that crazy man out in the streets. So this is my first post here. It's kinda long, but a scary experience from 15 years ago. By the way, I'm a 29-year-old female now. So anyway, I'm not from the US and I'm from a smaller country. And when I was 14, I got a missed call off a number that I didn't recognize one day. And being 14, I never called, I only texted. So I asked this number who it was. The reply I got was that they had called the wrong number by mistake. No big deal, except they started to try and text me every single day, little things like how are you and etc. I was naive and I played along when I was bored. I made up a fake name, and even sent him a fake photo of some random girl off the internet just because he bugged me so much and I didn't want him to know me because, stranger danger and all of that. But I did tell them that I was 14. He never called me again, and I had no intention in calling him, so we just texted here and there, and he told me that he was 17. He was very intense in terms of telling me how I was too nice for him and he was so lucky to text me. I was never the mushy type, and it always seemed like a cheesy film scene when he went on like this. But he was very persistent. I could get up to 100 messages a day, and I might reply to 20 of them. I have seen no reason to be worried, until one day I told my friend about this guy that I was texting, and then we decided to prank call him. And this guy answered, and he sounded at least like my father's age. We freaked out and I stopped texting him. He figured it out that it was me who called him because of my sudden ghosting, and he put 2 and 2 together. To this day, I don't know how. It's not like today where tracking is somewhat easier, especially since I gave this guy a fake name and my phone number wasn't attached to any of my social medias back then. I told him the part of the country I lived in, but not what town or any other details. He kept calling me, and of course I ignored him. But then one day in school, me and my friend who did the prank call on him, we got several messages. When she prank called him, we forgot to put her number in private. There were missed calls and text messages asking us where we were, did we like him, telling her to tell me to come meet him, and it was very intense. She obviously freaked out as much as I did, then even more so when he sent us both a picture of our school, and we lost it. There's 6 schools in our town, and how we got the right one, I will never know. We stayed after school to study in fear that he was outside. My math teacher was a family friend, and I waited for her to come around just to ask her for a ride home for us. We went to my house, turned on our phones to a crazy amount of messages, all saying that he would meet us one day and that he loved me. He told us that he traveled 4 hours and then couldn't understand why we didn't come out to say hi. I was petrified to tell my mother, so we decided to ditch our phone numbers and get new phone numbers and never utter a word of it again. For the next few weeks, I lived in a world of constant fear and anxiety. I couldn't walk alone, even though I knew it was probably impossible for him to know who I really was. But in the end, I told my mother, and then we went to the police because I knew that this guy had bad intentions. The phone number I had for him was a burner phone basically. I think that's what it's called in the US. It had no details attached to it, and it was impossible to really look into it any further. Nonetheless, we made a statement, and that was it. So yeah, the man pretending to be a 17-year-old boy who drove 4 hours to meet a 14-year-old girl. Let's never, ever meet. So I lived in a pretty nice area with my husband and some family friends. We lived there for a few years with nothing bad happening around us, and it felt like a very safe neighborhood. And now for context, I'm a very short white female and I am considered disabled, even though I look fine, but I could never really beat anyone up since my disability has limited my activity severely. Anyways, on to the story. This happened about a year before we moved. I had some stories pop up on Facebook of some traffickers that were targeting both women and children at a local store that we lived right behind. I was freaked out, so I made it a point to not go to the store without my husband. I still got the news articles about people being followed, grabbed, and kidnapped from the store, but I felt pretty safe as long as I didn't go anywhere without my husband. I was going to work one day, and I worked about 15 minutes away from my house. It was a call center kinda out in the middle of nowhere. There were fields every which way, and I worked the afternoon shift and was one of the last people to leave at night. I had to stop and get gas, and I was a little freaked out because I was scared to go anywhere without my husband. But I wasn't going to make it to work and back home, so I had no choice. I stopped at the station and was slightly relieved that it was super busy. I got out, I started pumping my gas, when this big van pulled up in the spot next to mine. A guy got out and started pumping his own gas as well. Then he walked around the pump and got in between my car and me. He smiled and said, "Wow, your car is so clean. How do you get it so clean?" I was flabbergasted at the question. My car was a mess. It was dirty with bugs and stuff on it. "Why don't you show me how you get it so clean?" He reached out to touch me, but I jerked back. Another car then pulled up behind me, and a guy got out. I think he freaked the other guy out because he walked back to his van. I quickly finished pumping my gas and I got into my car. I locked the doors, and I sped away. A few minutes later, I look out my window and the van is behind me. He was riding my bumper pretty much, and I could see the guy smiling and laughing with some other guy. I was pretty freaked out, but I figured that he was going to the freeway. We passed the freeway, but he kept following me. Now I was very freaked out. The only place on this road now is my work. I called my husband, but he didn't answer since he was also at work. I was freaking out, so I picked up speed and I continued going to work. I kept looking back and the van was still there, just a little farther back. I made it to work, and it was a large building with lots of cars in the parking lot. I parked right in front of the doors in a handicapped spot, and then I ran inside. I looked back through the locked doors, and I saw the guy stopped in the front looking pissed. I ran up to my department, and I went right up to a friend who was an ex-military. He carried multiple guns on him at all times, and I cried as I told him what happened. I got to work, but I was still freaked out all day. We closed, and I was walking down to my car. I peeked out the windows and saw the white van. I couldn't see anyone in there, and I wasn't even sure if it was the same van. I ran back to my department, and I told my friend what was going on. He pulled out his gun and walked me outside. The van had moved now. It moved right behind my car. My friend walked me to his car. We then got in, and he drove me right up to my car. He then followed me all the way home and sat outside until I was inside the house. I could see the van following us, but once we got past the freeway, he turned onto it. The next afternoon on my way to work, I passed the same gas station as before, and the van pulled out. Again, they followed me to work, but they turned away once I got to the parking lot. This went on for about a week. They would follow me to work, leave, then be outside when I was leaving, and my friend would walk me out. My buddy told me that they were probably trying to learn my schedule so they could figure out a time to jump me. He insisted that I take one of his guns, just in case he wasn't there at work to walk me out. I didn't want it though, as I was afraid that if I had it, then I would get pulled over for something, and then get in trouble for having a gun not in my name and not having a permit for it. I was telling my husband that evening about how this van was still following me, and he suggested that I should call the cops and let them know. I honestly don't know why I didn't think of that. So the next morning when I was about to get ready for work, I called and I told them everything. And then I left for work. Just like clockwork, the van pulled out of the gas station and then started following me. We were on the long stretch of the road that nothing was on when I spotted a car parked off to the side of the road. I passed, and then the van passed, and then the lights on the car came on, and then the van was pulled over. I later found out that the men following me had several warrants of rape and attempted kidnapping. The back of the van had knives, rope, gloves, mask, chloroform, and some kind of other sketchy crap in it. The cops believed that I was going to be their next target. And when I got to my work, my friend wasn't there. He was sick. I am so glad that I called the cops that morning because I don't think I would have made it home if he wasn't there to walk me out. Anyways, that's my creepy story, and I hope you guys liked it. It's 100% true, and we have since moved out and lived in a not-so-nice area. But so far, I haven't noticed any creepy people around me. But I always carry pepper spray whenever I go out. I'm a 24-year-old female, and I'm not sure if I'm being irrational in my fear, so I thought that it would be best to post about it and see if others agree or not. I love going on walks by myself. I struggle with mental health issues, and my walks alone, especially on sunny days, have been one of the only things to help alleviate my spirals and such. About a week ago, I had gone on one of my walks like normal. I started it, and then I noticed a guy on a motorized bike pass by the street in front of me and had the thought of, that's the same guy that was hanging out at the gas station, the one who was eyeing me the last time that I went on a walk. But other than that, I was also like, I'm sure he's just going on a ride. Don't think too much about it. I walked down a few blocks just listening to my music and enjoying the sun when I saw him again 2 blocks down, crossing the street. But this time, he had stopped in the middle of the road, mid-crossing the street, and I saw him just looking in my direction. This set an alert off in my head, so I took my headphones off while continuing to walk so I could be a bit more aware of my surroundings. I decided to turn right on the block that I was on because I was not wanting to meet up with that guy. And as I got down towards the end of the block, I heard his bike again, so I turned out to see if he was in eyeshot. He was. He was at the church on the next block over, on the same street, parked, and he was looking in my direction again. I only looked for a couple of seconds because I was scared that if he saw me looking at him, he would think that I wanted to talk to him. The road I was on leads directly to an isolated road where there is a large field and not many houses there. That is the usual path I take on my walks, but I had a very strong gut feeling telling me not to go that way this time. So I had turned the corner onto the street that takes me directly back to my house. It felt almost as if he was waiting to see which direction I was going to take, because as soon as I turned, I heard his bike rev up again. I was starting to feel quite panicked, so I started to rapid-fire text my boyfriend, just as someone needs to know my location kind of thing. And as I got to the block in front of my house, ready to cross the street to head home, I saw him a block down to my right yet again, crossing the street, and he was looking around him as if he was searching. I quickly crossed the street before he saw me, and I ran inside my house. Am I being irrational in my fear? I will say that I have PTSD and deal with quite severe hypervigilance because of it, but the gut feeling was so intense. It was almost like a weird intuition thing. I haven't gone on a walk since it happened, and I keep pepper spray on me everywhere I go. But I am of small stature, and I feel as though that I don't have much strength to be able to fight off an attack, so I'm just spooked right now. But I thank you for listening to me ramble. My parents are divorced since 2 to 3 years now. They had a pretty good couple life till I was 13, and then big fights happened at least once a month. I never had a good relationship with my dad, mostly because we had different opinions and points of views, so it was a miracle if we said good morning to each other. When my parents got the divorce, my mom decided that she didn't want any contact with him anymore. So, he started to talk to me to try and get a new start, but it was all just an excuse to try and manipulate me to reach my mom, so I didn't want to speak to him again. Now, every time that I go out, I feel like he's spying on me. I really feel like someone is watching me all the time. One time, I was walking my dog, and he was just next to me, and he tried to scare me with his car, like he was acting like he was going to push me with it. And today, he was there on the same street as me, and I started to walk super fast so he couldn't follow me. But after that, I saw him in his car, going around my house. I'm so scared of him showing up at my work and trying to speak with me. He doesn't know where I work yet, but what if he follows me there? I don't know what to do, because I've been seeing him a lot now, and it's impossible that it's just a coincidence. I moved a lot growing up, and by the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times, and I was about 1.5 years into my most recent move in this story. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together. I met them through one of those close friends. They were in a band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy-set, and originally kind of intimidating. Although, I was never afraid of large men before him. Well, that's a lesson learned. I kinda had a bad home life, so I would spend as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until 6 or 7 at night with this same friend group. The 3 of us lived in the same direction, and we would walk the half-hour trip together until our paths split. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home since the others had gone home already. I just thought that he was being a gentleman. Then, he mentioned something from a previous move when he lived in California. He said that he didn't walk a friend home once, and something horrible happened. He then left it at that, and I let him walk me home. We got a lot closer after that. We bonded over both living in California and then exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and also his self-harm, and I just wanted to help him. A few months later, he tried asking me out. It was this big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and then sang it to me in the cafeteria. But I was already dating someone, and when I turned him down, he got angry. A freaky, quiet, twitchy kind of angry, and I felt so bad. I then started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends. We still hang out in groups, but I would pass him on the street walking somewhere, and a few minutes later, I would see that he changed directions and then had started to follow me. He would walk me to classes by following me in passing period at a distance. I started to minimize the group time that we spent together, and he would follow me more. I had friends meet me at each class and walk me to my next one because I didn't feel safe, and he knew where I lived. Then, he started to talk, not to me, but to my mutual friends about that one girl in California who he tried to walk home. At first, he just shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then, she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes. And every time he rambled about her, she became more and more like me. And then he said what happened. Over literal weeks, this fantasy evolved. They were walking home, and they were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, which was coincidentally also my birthday. And then she died horribly, and he couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who has brown curly hair and blue eyes, my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling added more and more detail, and this guy with a sick fantasy about my death would follow me around and knew where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive, mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I know for sure that he could throw a punch. I never felt safe at our school or in our little town walking home from school. One day at school, he had a breakdown. He freaked out and ran out of the school in a panic. I was sent after him, and I found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure he was okay. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I had been hearing from my mutual friends, with added details. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and then asked for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone. I didn't have anything else on me, and he thought that I was calling the cops. Then he stabbed me. Once, twice, again and again. And Sam just stood there horrified. He then told me that he saw red and grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body and attacked the homeless man. He killed him with his own knife. He told me he killed someone. My stalker killed someone. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was a fantasy or real. I didn't care how it would affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police. I was scared for my life. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first. And the morning we went and told them everything. The stalking, the stories, how he admitted to murder, and that he was the reason why they moved from California. How I was afraid for my life and I wanted to call the police. The counselor didn't take us seriously. She went to the principal. And the principal, which is not a mental health expert, called Sam in to talk about the accusations. The principal then informed me that he did not think that Sam had any kind of mental illness or that I was in any danger, and then that was that. I lost faith in adults, and I gave up on going to the police. I stayed with my friend walking me in between classes and hiding behind my abusive boyfriend. I was looking behind me every single step of my walk home that year. The counselors ended up gaslighting us to the point where this all feels like a fever dream now, and that I would think that it's made up if it weren't for my journal entries recording the events of my growing panic and the similar stories from my friend group. So, Sam, let's not meet again. Honestly, my story is not too bad, though I would still rather never meet this person again. I was stalked, but not because they were into me, but because they were into my best friend, Emma. Emma is gorgeous, like to the obscene level, and has always had guys and girls fawning over her. And she had a friend named Mike, and Mike is who this story is about. I met Mike through Emma, and it was clear immediately that Mike was obsessed with her. She was actually into him too for a bit, but she wanted something not serious. Mike came on hard and heavy, so Emma distanced herself from him. And she distanced herself even more after he made some shocking comments about his opinion on sexual assaults mostly being fake. When Emma and I graduated high school, we had planned to move into together, but due to a family situation, she only stayed at our place about 2 days a week and never on a set schedule. She also could not keep a job to save her life. Her family life was chaotic, and it made it where she would have to leave at a moment's notice. Emma also had several places that she crashed at, either family, friends, my family, and it depended on her situation and any odd jobs that she was working. She did a lot of odd jobs, babysitting, yard work, elder care, catering, and etc. Nowhere stable, and often she wouldn't even know what she was doing until that day. After Emma distanced herself from Mike, I started to realize that he was at my work often, like 3 or so times a week. It would not have been too weird, except my work was a department store for women and children. No men's clothes at all in the store. At first, Mike would just come in, do a lap, and then leave. It was really weird, but I honestly just thought that he was walking the mall. Lots of people do that, as my town has practically no entertainment. But then, Mike started hanging out in my store and talking to me while I worked, always talking about Emma. How is Emma? Why is she avoiding him? Those kind of questions. I was evasive, going one-word answers, trying to tell him that I needed to work. My manager even scolded me for having friends hanging while working. And when I explained that I did not want him there and that he wanted to know about my friend, my manager asked if I wanted him to talk to Mike. I said yes, feeling relieved. And after that, Mike went back to doing a lap and leaving until my manager eventually stationed a big loss prevention guy at my register as a deterrent. And it worked. No more Mike at work. I had won. Except, I had not counted on Mike being extra creepy. He started showing up at my house instead. A couple of points. Mike did not have a car. I lived in a different town than Mike. My family and my job is about a 20-minute ride by car away. No public transportation in my town or in his. And Uber did not exist in this area then either. And Mike didn't have a job as far as I knew. Mike knew where I lived because when I first moved in, we had a housewarming party and accidentally made the Facebook invite public. Mike started coming over at random times, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes in the evening, always asking to speak to Emma, and I always told him Emma wasn't there, even if she was. For her safety, I advised her not to come to the house anymore, and to tell Mike that she wasn't interested, which she did, bluntly no more distancing and blocked him. And this time, I moved in a new roommate, a coworker who, while also female, had a gun and a big boyfriend. Mike started coming by less frequently, and any time he did, I would tell him that he wasn't welcome. Now, I know I should have called the cops, but there were two things preventing me. One, I was from a not-so-grand family who avoided cops for the most part. And two, my new roommate was a criminal law major, and she was already concerned about how that would appear for her career. Not great reasons, but for a 19 to 20-year-old, it was enough reasons for me not to mention it. Eventually, I stopped seeing Mike, but I would still occasionally spot him in places where I was in. The mall, my town's grocery store, and my dog's favorite park. I stopped posting on Facebook around this time, because even though Mike was blocked, he was clearly still able to see my posts. I also got the creeping suspicion that he was coming by my house sometimes. My stuff on my porch would be moved, and at night my motion sensor lights would go off, and I kept finding Mike's cigarette butts. At least, it was the same kind that he smoked. My roommate had been there for about 4 months, when one night, she had her boyfriend over when someone started pounding on the door. When her boyfriend answered, he saw someone who looked like Mike running away. The next day, my roommate and her boyfriend went out of town for a concert. She gave me her gun, even though I felt safe because she had gotten a dog that she was training as a guard dog. I started watching a cooking show in the living room, and at some point I fell asleep. And in the middle of the night, I woke up to my dog and the guard dog losing their minds, barking like mad at the window. And there was a tall figure that bolted as soon as I sat up. I grabbed the gun, I opened the door, and I yelled, "I know that's you, and I have a gun, and I'm calling the cops." Which I didn't do. I just locked me and the dogs in the bathroom, and then I called my dad, who luckily was not angry about being woken up in the middle of the night. He drove over and advised calling the cops and filing a restraining order. We called the cops, but they said that since nothing was broken and there was no evidence, there was nothing to be done about it. Luckily after this, I heard through the grapevine that about a week after the incident with the dogs, Mike's family sent him to live with a relative in a different state. He did come back a couple of years ago, but he was wise enough to only contact me once. When I got to tell him that Emma was not only happily married, but not at all interested in talking to him. I reminded him that I was willing to call the cops if he ever came near either of us again. And he never did, and I don't see him anymore. Though, he did try to befriend my husband on Facebook, and all it took was another block for him to go away. So, it's been about 5 years since I last saw you. Mike, let's not meet. I'm a female, and this happened to me when I was 19. I fled the nest when I went to university, and I wasn't very streetwise. I lived in a nice area of a city, which unfortunately backed onto a very rough area. You could cut through the rough area as a shortcut, but my friends and neighbors always warned me of walking through this area even in the day. It did also have a terrible reputation in general. The last conversation with my neighbor should have made an impact on my way of thinking. She said, "You should be careful walking through there. You can buy guns and knives from the tower blocks, and every year, a girl has gone missing while walking through." I just brushed this off with that immature attitude of, I know best and it won't happen to me. So, to set the scene, I used to go out partying and clubbing a lot while I was at university. One Christmas, I met my friends in the city and I got very merry, and after, I staggered out of the last club at 3 a.m. and I decided to walk home. My friends begged me to get a taxi, but as a tight student, I said that I would just walk it. They said their goodnights, and then told me to let them know when I got in. I remember it being very cold. There was some ice and snow about, which was hard to navigate in my skate trainers. And then I got to the rough area to take my shortcut. It would shave around 10 minutes off my time. I started to walk down the road past the tower blocks when this white transit van slowly drives up behind me. I turned around and they slowed down, and as soon as I turned back, they started to creep up to me faster than before. When they were level to me, I turned and looked at them. There were 3 middle-aged men staring at me. They started shuffling and looked like they were getting ready for something. Initially, I just assumed that they were lost or that they lived in the area. But all of a sudden, they ripped the van around in the road, doing a U-turn up towards me. I've never run so fast in my life, and I don't know how I did it. I didn't slip, I didn't fall, and I managed to get away safely. And when I got into my house, I locked the doors and I hid in my bedroom. I messaged my friends to say that I got in okay, but I didn't mention the night's events until the following morning. I spoke to my neighbor again, the one who warned me about the area, and she said that she wasn't surprised. The girls that went missing disappeared in the early hours of the morning, presumably after being at a party or clubbing. I learned my lesson that day, and I never walked down there on my own again. I also became a lot more street savvy, and I listened more. I had a few let's not meet moments when I was a student, which I might add at a later date. This happened to me in my junior year of high school, and I had almost forgotten about it until my dad brought it up a couple of days ago, and I figured that I would share. So, I live really close to a shopping center, like 3 minutes away, and before school, maybe once or twice a week, I would stop by to grab donuts or orange juice. I go to the store a lot, so I recognize a decent amount of the employees there. One day before school, I decided to stop by and grab donuts. The layout of the entrance is important. As you walk up to the doors, there's a huge set of shopping carts that an employee is normally working at by collecting carts from the parking lot. And as you're walking away from the entrance and out of the store, if you turn left, you go into the main large parking lot. You can walk straight instead to the side of the building where there are around 20 parking spots. And there's an exit on the side of the building that's closer to my house and less crowded than the main road. And I drive a truck, so I used to park on that side. It's very well lit, it has cameras, and it's next to the store and etc. So I've never felt like isolated. Anyway, I park on the side like normal, and I walked into the store. And as I passed the grocery carts in the front of the doors, there's an employee there who I don't recognize. He says good morning to me. I say it back, nothing weird, right? I go into the store and get my donuts, I pay, and then I walk out, and I see the guy again and he's just staring at me. Okay, that's kinda weird, but I just kept walking to my car. I get to the driver's side of my car, I open it, and then I hop in. I set my food down on the passenger side, and then I turn to reach out and close the driver's door. And as I put my hand out, another hand stops the door from shutting, and the employee from earlier steps in between my door and I. Alarms were going off in my head. He asked what my name was, and I, stupidly, gave him my real name because I was panicking. My name is super common, such as Sarah, and not my real name, but is equally common. He asked for my phone number, and I said no. I told him that I had to get to school and that I'm running late. but he wouldn't take no for an answer and he would not move. I gave him a fake number and he finally backs out of my door. I shut it immediately and then I take off. I go to the parking lot of my school and I called my dad to tell him what happened and what the guy looked like, and he went down and reported it for me. I thought that this was the end, but it got weirder. A couple days pass and I get a direct message on Instagram from this guy. No way he knows my last name. He just knows my first name, which is again super common. I got this DM during my history class in which we sat in groups of 4. I tell the people at my table what happened without bringing up what he looks like or his name. A girl at my table, also named Sarah, pulls his Instagram page up and asks if it's him. It was, and I ask how she knew. Apparently, he had DM'd her as well, and another girl in our class also named Sarah. I had 1 or 2 other friends with the same name, so I asked them if they got a direct message from this guy too. And sure enough, they did. One of the girls with my name works at the store with him and said that he was insanely creepy around her all the time, like following her to the break room anytime that she would go in. He would find excuses to be around her. He would switch shifts to work at the same time, asking her out every other shift. She tells us that he was 21 at that time, in which we were all 16 or 17, making it even creepier that he's going for all these high school girls with the same name. During lunch, I stayed in my history teacher's room with a couple of the girls who got messages as well, and we explained to him what was going on. And then he says to go to campus security and tell them, just to make sure that he isn't around the school. The girl who works with him went to report it, and that was that. My dad said the manager said that she would take care of it when he reported it, and the girl who worked with him said that she talked to her manager as well, and the guy ended up getting fired, and a police report was made. But nothing could really be done since he hadn't done anything. I had no clue how he found my Instagram, but our guess is that he was just messaging a bunch of Sarahs who all happened to be underage. So, creepy guy at the grocery store, let's not meet. The college I attended was in a very tiny town in eastern Washington. So eastern, in fact, it was only about 10 minutes from the Idaho border. But that's not really important here. There was not much to do in Pullman, other than drink and go to parties, and I had never really been much of a party goer myself, so I was one of the few not spending every single weekend just getting hammered. One of those weekends, I had spent pretty much the whole day in my dorm room, and I was antsy for some social interaction. I hadn't done much that day other than study, and I wanted to at least get out of my dorm. So I texted my best friend at that time, and we decided that we would go to the football stadium to look at the stars. The football stadium at that time remained open 24/7, and at the time we left, it was around 12 a.m., so the stadium lights had shut off, and we had a beautiful view of the stars. We walked to the stadium in great spirits and had a wonderful night talking and laughing. On the way back, everything changed. By the time we were leaving back to our dorm rooms, it was a little after 2 in the morning. We were walking down the main road when we see a Jeep approaching, nothing too unusual. However, the lights were off, so my best friend, not knowing how to stay sexy and don't get murdered, or SSDGM, used her hands to make a flashing signal at them, telling them that their lights were off. And as soon as she did this, they got only a short distance past us when we heard them slam on their brakes and then turn around, driving up the wrong lane of traffic to come back. We were right by a sky bridge at that time that this happened, which had stairs leading up to the bridge. We ducked behind the stairs, but the Jeep was driving back and forth looking for us. We ended up having to play a sick game of duck and hide on the stairs until the Jeep finally parked. And when they did, we had gotten to the top of the stairs and laid ourselves flat on the sky bridge, hiding in the shadows. We had a clear view of them, and as soon as we were flat on the ground, we see 5 men get out of the Jeep, and not just that, but they each had a baseball bat. These men were checking the bushes in the surrounding areas, again, looking for us. I called the police and quietly explained the situation, and after about 10 minutes of the men searching, whistling, and swinging their bats around, they finally left. And not long after, the police showed up, but there wasn't much that they could do but offer us a ride home in their cruiser. I have no idea what those men's intentions were, but I'm so glad that I never found out. So, to the creepy 5 men on the Stadium Way, let's never meet again. Hi there. I've lurked for a long time, and I've decided that it's time to share my own story from about 4 years ago. I was around 15, and when I wasn't too busy with schoolwork, I worked at a news agency, mainly selling lottery tickets and newspapers. And while I had my fair share of creeps, stalkers, and loonies, this one for me has to be the scariest. Among my regular customers was an older woman, perhaps in her late 40s or early 50s, although she definitely appeared older than she was. She had scraggly hair that was bleach blonde and wore extremely bright, gaudy makeup. No one knew much about her, but she was often seen around different shady men, and from the way she acted and spoke, it was understood that she was most likely on drugs. She spoke to me and my co-workers of angels and heavens and fairies and demons. But I simply brushed it off as an older lady going through a midlife crisis, dabbling in some sort of new age spirituality. From the very first shift that I served this woman, when I was around 13 or 14, she was mesmerized by me. From the moment she saw me, she was enthusiastically running up to co-workers and even other customers, telling them that I was an angel. And from that shift onwards, every time she saw me, she wouldn't stop talking about how beautiful I was, that I was pure and innocent, and that I was an angel. Accordingly, she said that I should return to the angels. I didn't see it as anything sinister, even though I got extremely uncomfortable vibes from her. I was extremely friendly to customers, and I've always been a naturally talkative, bubbly person. In addition, I was still young, naive, and eager to please my boss with my customer service, even though I thought that this lady was kind of weird. I would often just smile politely as she raved on about whatever fantastical thing she thought up. Over time, she became fixated with me. She slowly began to learn my shifts, and if I was away or my roster changed, she would ask co-workers where I was, and whenever I was at work, she would appear. I told my boss this, and how her obsession with me was starting to make me uncomfortable. He told me that I should put up with it because of the extra income it gave him. Because of her fixation with me, this lady would spend hundreds of dollars at a time on lottery multiple times a week. And once again, I was young and didn't have too much of a backbone, so even though I felt uncomfortable, I just accepted that this situation couldn't be changed. I needed the money, and not many places in my town were hiring, let alone interested in taking on a high school student. One day, as I was going to the spot that I would meet my parents, they usually pick me up at a nearby road. This lady appeared seemingly from thin air. I was so startled that I didn't even notice when she grabbed my arm and asked, "Would you like to return to the other angels? They're missing you, darling." I was freaked out, but her words didn't mean much to me, and I simply saw it as a strange woman with wacky spiritual beliefs. Luckily that day, an older coworker walked by, saw this, swiftly yanked me away, and stayed there until my dad arrived. I wish I could say that this was the last time that I saw that customer, but it wasn't. Even though I didn't see her waiting for me again, I often felt uncomfortable arriving at work, leaving, and at work itself, as though someone was watching me. This lady kept coming in and kept spending hundreds of dollars from God knows where. However, unlike when I first started, she didn't come in with a different man each time. She came alone or with one particular man who I hadn't seen before. I always felt extremely uncomfortable around him, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The lady's ravings got even crazier than ever, and in addition to her usual talk about angels, she started to try getting me to follow her to places by claiming that the government had tried to poison me just then, and she saw them slip cyanide into my food, or that they infected my toothpaste with something that would kill me, so I had to follow her now. I never did. One time, when I was busy serving other customers, I noticed her in the corner of my eye, lingering around my drink bottle with something that I couldn't see clutched in her hand. Needless to say, I moved my drink bottle very quickly, and I was extremely unnerved, more so than ever. I told my boss everything, but he continued to say virtually that I would lose my job if I didn't just put up with it, as she brought in a lot of money. This all came to a climax one day at the end of my shift. I just learned how to cash up the registers and close the shop, which was an exciting responsibility for me and made me feel very accomplished. To close up, I would have to lock the roller doors at the front and exit through the back door, which led to a pretty shady concrete area that never had anyone around. It was like a huge concrete jungle with heaps of twists and turns and tall concrete walls. It was always completely silent and empty, and I'd never seen another person in that area outside the back door. As I exited work and locked the door, I felt incredibly uneasy, and I thought that I could hear breathing behind me. However, seeing no one when I turned around, I told myself that it was just paranoia. As I checked my phone to see if my dad had left yet to pick me up, I felt a hand grasp my shoulder, tight. My whole body froze. Before I even looked, I knew who it was. Sure enough, when I turned around, this customer was standing there with a huge grin and her eyes sparkling. She engulfed me in a hug, which I wriggled free from. I could tell something was very wrong, so I tried to run, but she grabbed my arm. She was stronger than she looked. She tried to distract me and start up random conversations, sprinkling in comments about how the angels were so excited to be reunited with me. I had no idea what she was trying to do, until I heard something pull up around the corner. A white van, all its windows blacked out, and it slowly crept across the gravelly road towards us. And I'll never forget the way that lady's face looked like when she said, "Let's go. The angels have been waiting. You'll be with them again soon." To this day, I have no idea how, but I gained some type of superhuman fight or flight strength, and I tugged my arm free just as the van was slowing down beside me, and then I ran. The lady followed, but thankfully her physical strength didn't extend to running. Thankfully, I knew the twists and the turns of this area quite well now, so I sprinted through this concrete labyrinth until I reached a pillar that I knew of to duck behind. I didn't move. I had a metal keychain which made a lot of noise, so I clutched that in one hand, and I held myself up with my other hand, ready to launch from the ground and run as soon as I could. I could hear the woman and someone else, a man. I didn't know who, but he sounded like the man that I'd seen with her recently. They were running around, checking crevices and corners, searching for me. And after about 15 minutes, they gave up, and I heard the van roll away. After a final check using the van, they didn't know that I could see them, but I saw them pretend to leave, then turn it off, and then wait. I think they thought that I would emerge from hiding, but as I could see what their trap was, I continued to stay still. After what felt like forever, they eventually left. Not knowing if this was another trap set up to coax me out of my hiding, I cautiously peered around my corner. Unsure if they were gone, and knowing that I wasn't safe if I stayed or left, I ran. Thankfully, my dad was parked where we'd agreed to meet, and I raced to his car. I got scolded for getting to the car late, and then we went home. I took an extended leave after that, and when I eventually did go back to work, the lady was gone, and I never saw her again. So, to the lady who wants to return me to the angels, let's not meet.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.